Okay, let's talk about atomization. In the world of science, physics, and commercial hairspray bottles, atomization is a process through which a liquid gets forced through a special atomizing mechanism usually embedded within the handle or top of a bottle. This transforms the liquid into a fine mist of separated droplets. Let's go through this process in a more detailed way so we can show how this relates to dictatorships and oppression. As we can see, we have the reservoir, which holds the liquid, the atomizer, which forces the liquid into a separated mist, and then we have the product of the atomization, the little individual droplets. Now that we have this image clear in our heads, let's go back to Hannah Arendt's foundational text, The Origins of Totalitarianism. In Origins, Arendt goes into very granular detail about how totalitarianism, the single most oppressive form of government possible, comes into existence. Arendt paints us a vivid and gruesome picture, a society where all of its members are beholden, more than anything else, to the prosperity of the totalitarian state. Surely we've all seen pictures of happy and compliant Germans in Nazi Germany or North Koreans under the Kim regime, and thought, why would they not band together and overcome their oppressive government? Arendt's answer to this question is atomization. So let's go back to the bottle again. But now we're thinking about atomization in a social context related to totalitarianism. Think of the liquid in the reservoir as a pre-atomized society. Essentially, the populace in any non-totalitarian country. Just as the liquid is all together and connected, so are societies in these countries. All these people, or water droplets, are connected, whether it be by family bonds, high school friendships, romantic relationships, or even sports club participation. These social bonds don't have any real underlying dynamic. People just know each other and grow bonds because they have similar interests, or they're in close proximity for long spans of time, or because they're related by blood. Now, let's move to the tube and spray bottle. In the real world, this is what brings the liquid up to the atomizer and primes it for atomization. In our metaphor for totalitarian atomization, this is where we see charismatic, autocratic leaders doing what they're most famous for. Think of the speeches of Idi Amin or Adolf Hitler, and their bombastic, jingoistic speaking style, and how they condemn certain groups of people as the causes of massive social problems. Just as the tube primes the liquid for atomization, the totalitarian movement, essentially the social campaigns advocating for these specific leaders and political positions, similarly primes the population. To get a better understanding of what's actually happening here, let's look again at Hannah Arendt's writing about the atomization process. When discussing Stalin's totalitarian takeover of Soviet Russia, Arendt writes, in order to fabricate an atomized and structureless mass, he had first to liquidate the remnants of power in the Soviets, which, as the chief organ of national representation, still played a certain role and prevented absolute rule by the party hierarchy. The Bolshevik government then proceeded to the liquidation of classes and started, for ideological and propaganda reasons, with the property-owning classes, the new middle class in the cities and in the peasant country. Now let's break down these quotes and also move to the nozzle of our bottle, because this is at the very center of the atomization process. Remember when we were talking about all the ways that people can be connected, like the droplets in a reservoir? In these quotes, Arendt is pointing out how Stalin's Russia essentially went out of their way to strip all of these connections from their society. The examples I gave earlier were smaller scale, but Arendt is going straight to what she considers the single largest connecting factor between people, class. When Stalin goes after class, stripping people of any class-based connections between each other, creating a mass of disconnected individuals, Arendt calls this process massification. This is finally getting to the most consequential part of the atomization process, the point where the primed water in the tube gets forcibly separated through the atomizing spray nozzle. Just as the nozzle acts as the atomizer, separating water into individual droplets, the totalitarian state acts as an atomizer for the populace, stripping its citizens of these connectors and separating them into a group of collective, atomized individuals. So, why is this process so important? Well, atomization is key to Arendt's conception of totalitarianism because an atomized mass of people is more easily controlled than that collected, connected pool of liquid in the reservoir. Imagine trying to single out specific droplets in that reservoir. You couldn't do it. But if we spray this liquid out, we can easily recognize and then control the individual droplets. Now, I can probably imagine some of you thinking that this still doesn't finish the picture. Sure, it's understandable thinking about the populace being atomized, but that doesn't mean that there weren't any soccer clubs or family dinners in Soviet Russia or Nazi Germany. So what gives? How did these connectors still exist in a post-atomized society? Well, Arendt has a pretty clear answer for that. Once the totalitarian state successfully atomizes the population, you can then selectively dole out other ways for people to be connected. But now all these connections, these new connections, have an underlying motive: reliance and loyalty to the state. In a pre-atomized society, you could be part of a recreational soccer club and there were no other connections to that. A bunch of people, probably with different worldviews, would all come together for this recreational pastime. But now, in an atomized totalitarian society, the new soccer clubs are, generally, either directly or indirectly, owned by the state. Maybe the local police regularly stop by practices or team dinners to make sure there's no anti-state propaganda being spread. Maybe the team gets necessary funding or licensing to use a soccer pitch by a state athletic commission. Maybe the team's coach has to make regular reports about the team's commitment to the state's ideology. Finally, in a totalitarian state, the ultimate regulator is not the state, but the people themselves. Arendt's totalitarians would much rather instill this fear in the populace early, so that if anyone ever did speak up about how bad the state was, their fellow players, friends, spouses, or mothers would be first in line at the Ministry for Enemies of the State to turn them in. As Arendt writes, if totalitarianism takes its own claims seriously, it must come to the point where it has to finish once and for all with the neutrality of chess. That is, with the autonomous existence of any activity whatsoever. From the point of view of totalitarian rulers, a society devoted to chess for the sake of chess is only in degree different and less dangerous than a class of farmers for the sake of farming. Himmler quite aptly defined the SS member as the new type of man who under no circumstances will ever do a thing for its own sake. And so, there it is. Why is atomization so useful for Arendt's totalitarians? Because once you successfully atomize a population, you can then repopulate it with connectors that have a loyalty to the state baked into them. In a Bolshevik or Nazi totalitarian state, a soccer club can be a way to advertise a Darwinian idea of racial or masculine superiority. A friendship or marriage can be a convenient way to have an informant near you all day, every day. And even something as innocent as a spray bottle can be a tool of anti-state propaganda.